Okay, we're going to take a look at the game Lee Moves North by SPI, and it also came out in 1973. It's kind of a sequel to their game, The Wilderness Campaign, utilizing the same system generally, only this one covering the Confederate summer offensives in the summer of 1862 and 1863. That would be the Antietam Campaign and the Gettysburg Campaign. Now, for those of you who have the game, you might have a first edition of the game. It was actually called Lee at Gettysburg in the original edition. SPI later changed that to Lee Moves North. So some of you may have, if you own the game, here it would say Lee at Gettysburg instead of Lee Moves North. Same game exactly. I don't know for collectors if that means anything. But it's a good game, and we're going to go over the components and some of the way the game system works. Here I'm duplicating a little bit my other video on the Wilderness Campaign, so I'll try not to do too much duplication and show you the differences in the two games. Now we'll just take an overall look at the map from a far away point of view. The edge of the map on the south here is Gordonsville. Here you have the Rappahannock River with Fredericksburg prominent, Brandy Station. Manassas Junction is here. There's the city of Washington and Alexandria. Over to the west, Harper's Ferry. Up here's the little town of Gettysburg. And that's the Susquehanna River there, with the town of city of Harrisburg, I guess. And way up in the northeast is Philadelphia. So it shows you overall what kind of territory the map covers. And over here to the west, of course, there's Winchester and the Shenandoah Valley. There's some things about this map I like and some things I dislike compared to the other one, and when I zoom in here I'll try to show you that. Now, as I mentioned in the other video on the Wilderness Campaign, the maps of the SPI games in the 70s were rather basic. They didn't have a lot of color, but they were very functional. So we'll just follow up the track there, following Brandy Station. Again, you can see Fredericksburg, the mouth of the Potomac River, Manassas Junction, and the city of Washington, Alexandria, following the Potomac here. The Shenandoah Valley, for some reason, is not as delineated as well. You can see those hash markings here. That's showing you the mountains, of course, and these little wee, look like little bridges, are actually the passes through the mountains. A couple of nitpicky things I like and don't like about the game is the way the mountain passes work. Now here at Sharpsburg you can see the South Mountain, the passes of Crampton's Gap and Turner's Gap. So they work the way they're supposed to. You can clearly see the mountain sides being blocked and the passes. That's fine, I don't mind that at all. But down over here you get some curious stuff I can't quite understand. I mean, what gap is that? I'm not quite sure what the name of that gap is historically. It's going from a clear terrain hex to a clear terrain hex. And there's a clear terrain hex here too, which makes that valley mighty wide. I think it just could be a map error and that's it. Other gaps, again, are more logical. You can see the gaps through the mountains there. And then you've got the gaps up here west of Gettysburg. So that was my little nitpick. Some of them are a little curious, but they do work. The two biggest changes from Wilderness Campaign was the combat results table and the step reduction system. And I'll talk about the step reduction system later. Now, the combat results table was smoother and easier to read, but there was a lot of aspects about it I didn't like. And it was kind of gamey when used in conjunction with the mountain pass rules. I can't detail exactly what I didn't like about it, but the long and the short of it was that an inferior force could often beat a superior force by kind of gamey tactics. Now, I'm not saying that a smaller force, like a Confederate force, shouldn't be able to defeat a larger force, like the Union had. That should be the case, especially in Civil War defensive combat. But that isn't quite the way the combat results table worked. It had these weird counterattack results, which meant you rolled, and if you rolled a counterattack result, you had to counterattack the attacker at 1 to 2, 1 to 3, and it didn't seem intuitive. It just seemed clunky. I thought that was the weak spot of the game. But let's take a look at the counters and the revised step reduction system. Okay, the step reduction system was improved in this version of the game. Before you was just some examples of the third corps union. Now when the third corps first comes on the game, it's a 12, and if it took casualties it would be reduced to a 9, then a 6, then a 4, then a 2, and if it took more losses after 2 it would be eliminated. Now in the original Wilderness game the steps were actually individual increments of 1, which meant that each corps had a heck of a lot of counters. They've improved that. Reflecting, they did casualty analysis of the Union armies, and they felt this was the best way to show historical casualties. And it made the game a little bit smoother and easier to sort the counters too. And below that you have the cute little train counter that I liked so much from the last game. That's for rail movement, of course, and units moving along the rail could move 5 times as fast. Okay, the Confederates had step reduction, of course, too, and there we have an example of A.P. Hill's division. It starts off with a 6. When it's reduced, it becomes a 5, and then a 4, then a 2. So the gradations were a little bit different than the Union, and the Confederates were fortunate enough to have named units right down to their last step. So that was a bit of an improvement, I think, than the old Wilderness campaign with this single step reduction. Now the basic rules to Lee Moves North were the same as Wilderness campaign, so nothing new there. I'll go over them a little bit, but I won't try to repeat the information I gave in the other video. But there's your turn record track. Each turn represented about 2 days, like in the other one. A little bit more colorful than the other one was. You have reinforcements coming in for the various campaigns. This game, by the way, covers the 2 invasions, as I mentioned, the Antietam and Gettysburg campaign. And there's your terrain effects chart, standard for an SPI game of that period. And the rules were the standard SPI fare for the period, just the pamphlet kind of rules. Not very complicated game to learn, but a heck of a lot of fun to play. Now for some reason I kept finding myself playing the Antietam campaign more than the Gettysburg campaign. I think it's because the Antietam campaign includes the Manassas campaign. So this is a typical setup for the 1862 Maryland campaign. You've got the Confederates concentrated around Gordonsville, Virginia here, and Pope's army just south of the Rappahannock. And you've got another corps here over at Fredericksburg. You might remember that the game features hidden intelligence, so most of the units are upside down, and you have to find out their exact strengths by using the cavalry units, one of the strong suits of the game. And this isn't an ideal setup or anything like that, just showing you a typical setup. So it actually begins with the Second Manassas campaign. And the date is what? I'll check that up. Now for some reason I kept finding myself playing the Antietam campaign more than the Gettysburg campaign. I think it's because the Antietam campaign includes the Manassas campaign. So this is a typical setup for the 1862 Maryland campaign. You've got the Confederates concentrated around Gordonsville, Virginia here, and Pope's army just south of the Rappahannock. And you've got another corps here over at Fredericksburg. You might remember that the game features hidden intelligence, so most of the units are upside down, and you have to find out their exact strengths by using the cavalry units, one of the strong suits of the game. And this isn't an ideal setup or anything like that, just showing you a typical setup. So it actually begins with the Second Manassas campaign. And the date is what? I'll check that up. Yeah, the game actually starts on August 17th, so it's actually covering technically the Battle of Cedar Mountain too, and Second Manassas, and goes on into September, the Battle of Antietam, of course, September 17th. So it's a good game. We showed you the start positions there. There happens to be a corps here at Harper's Ferry. That's the 8th Corps. And of course you've got the defenses of Washington and Alexandria also. Forgot to mention that in this game you got more leaders. In Wilderness Campaign you only got the leaders Lee and Grant. Here we have the Confederate Corps commanders, and of course you've got General Pope. And later McClellan's army comes in because at this point he's evacuating his army from the peninsula and is supposedly coming to aid Pope. So there's more commanders in this game, and when you play the Gettysburg campaign you get all the corps commanders, or rather wing commanders. Now the strong suit in this game was the cavalry reconnaissance. I thought it worked really neat. So we'll just show you a typical cavalry move as I did in the Wilderness Campaign. So this cavalry unit would pay 1 to cross the river here, 2 to enter the square, 3 to enter that hexagon, and 2 more for the zone of control. He would then attempt a cavalry probe against that unit and see if he identifies it. So he'd roll the die, and in this case we rolled a 2, which means it's successful. So we take the unit, flip it over to its real side, and we find out that they've identified the 12th Corps, which is a 9. Now, for example, the other cavalry unit could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to enter zone of control, and he'd do a probe against that unit. He would roll the die. In this case, he rolled a 4. That's also successful. He'd flip this unit, identifying the Union 11th Corps. He could also attempt a probe against Pope's staff there, rolling the die, rolling a 1, getting some good reconnaissance here, and flipping that and identifying the Union 1st Corps. So that's how cavalry reconnaissance works. Now I didn't put any dummy counters on the board, but that's, of course, you could have revealed dummy units too. So that's the way cavalry reconnaissance worked. Now with cavalry having reconnoitered the advance there, Lee could start moving his infantry divisions up. So he could pay 1 for the river here, 2, and just 3 to enter the square. Why? Because the Confederate Cavalry Brigade has negated the zone of control. So these units could move up now, and if you wanted to attack the 12th Corps. Now, just for the sake of argument, let's say Lee decided to attack there. We'll flip these units up, see what they are. I'm not saying that this is an optimal move or one you would do or anything like that. Just see what the odds would be. You've got a 9, 13, 17, 22, 26 factors. Another one, 26, 30 factors to 9. So you've got effectively a 3-to-1 attack. Now, let's say Lee himself is involved personally in that attack. So you'd have really 30, and you get to add Lee's 15. So that's 45 to 9. So you really have a 5-to-1 attack. And we're going to roll on this table, the one I don't like too much. Let's see what we get. You roll a 3. And at 5-to-1, that shows that it's DE2 and attacker loses 1. So the 9 would be replaced with 2 step losses down, and Lee would have to lose 1. So I'll do that and put the counters back on the board. Now, having selected the step reduction counters, we take the 12th Corps off the 9 and replace it with a 4. That's 2 steps down. And it's most efficient for Lee to have the losses taken off of D.H. Hill's division, which is originally 5. So he becomes a 4. And that's a typical combat. And that's a very simple example of combat. We had a nice roll there, 5-to-1 odds. That's generally how combat worked. Where combat got a little bit messy was in the mountain passes, where you added one of the dice and got that weird counterattack result. But I don't really want to talk about that. It's one of the game's weak points. I just don't like that combat result. But then that's me. You might not find this a problem at all. That's how combat worked. I don't know what else to say about this game, because as I hinted at in the Wilderness Campaign video, you really have to play this game to unlock its secrets and see how great a game it really is. Now, strategic-wise, it follows the history. The Confederate objective in the Maryland campaign is mainly to take the war out of Virginia. So we often find the Confederates beating up Pope here. McClellan's army starts arriving at Alexandria. Often there's a battle, sometimes in the Manassas area. Sometimes the Confederate just unplugs from the Union and marches north, crosses the Potomac, and tries to get points by taking the war out of Virginia. Best case scenario, maybe getting up to Harrisburg there and cutting the rail line. But in 1862, that's not very likely. Lee's army is very small, and McClellan's and Pope's combined is very large. Now, for the Gettysburg campaign, of course, the whole picture changes. The Confederate army is much bigger, it's well led, and Lee often can break off to the west here, across the Potomac, and you might find your battle somewhere in Pennsylvania somewhere. It's a very good game, but a video just doesn't do it justice, especially with the graphics of the time. So that's all I really need to say about Lee Moves North. It's not a review per se, it's just a general look at the game itself. Last word about Lee Moves North. The game is not very well suited for solitaire play, as I mentioned in the Wilderness Campaign video. Because the essence of the game is the hidden movement, the hidden strength, reconnaissance aspect of the game. That's the meat and potatoes of this game. Combat and movement are kind of the secondary things about the game. So, yeah, well, you could play solitaire with dummies and flip them, and you know, I guess it can be played solitaire, but you're not going to get the real game experience. You really need to play it as a two-player game. So I'd give Lee Moves North 8 out of 10 or so. I think it's still a good game. Graphically, it's not up to par with today's standards, but you know, who cares about that? It's a good game and a good simulation. Lee Moves North, made by SPI in 1973. So we're talking about, you know, a game that's over 40 years old. So give it a break. It's not a bad game.